A Brief Introduction to Quranic Exegesis by Ali Suleiman Ali. Chapter 1 Historical Overview. The science of tafsir aims to explain the meanings of Allah's word as revealed in His sacred book, the Quran, to His messenger Muhammad, and is usually rendered as Quranic interpretation, or exegesis. It is one of the major Islamic sciences. The Arabic root fasara means to unveil, to uncover, and traditional or classical Muslim scholars state that the verbal noun tafsir is derived from fasara, meaning to explain. Tafsir, literally meaning explanation, and ta'wil, interpretation, are two terms usually used by scholars as synonymous or interchangeable to denote Quranic interpretation or exegesis. The difference between tafsir and ta'wil, according to Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Maturidi, died 333 after Hijra. Tafsir is the explanation of the ultimate meaning of the text that unveils what God exclusively intended by the text, while ta'wil applies to upholding the more likely interpretation when the text has more than one possible meanings. Ta'wil is often used to elucidate meanings and sentences and is most used in theological texts or books, whilst tafsir is used in theological texts and other areas, such as the sciences of the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence. The term tafsir, according to my own finding, when used to mean the explanation of the Quran, was developed towards the second half or the end of the first Islamic century. Perhaps, Abdullah ibn Umar was the first person known to have used the word tafsir to mean interpretation of the Quran when he said,
ما يعجبني جرأة ابن عباس على تفسير القرآن الآن قد علمت أنه أوتي علم.
I do not like or I do not admire Ibn Abbas' daring on Quranic commentary, but now, I know he has been given knowledge. Indeed, we find no mention of this term in the Quran and the Hadith to mean the explanation of the meaning of the Quran. The Quran, on the other hand, used the word tafsir in one place, 25:3-3, to mean explanation. Both the Prophet and the companions allegorically interpreted some Quranic verses. Yet, their interpretations are being called tafsir, not ta'wil. This, I assume, is because many scholars of tafsir, if not the majority, have not seen any differences between the two meanings. The Prophet Muhammad and tafsir. The Prophet Muhammad was the first exegete or interpreter of the Quran, mufassir. But he did not, however, explain the whole of the Quran word for word because many of the verses were clear to the people of his time by virtue of their being Arabs who understood their own language. Generally, his explanations of Quranic scriptures occurred on one of three occasions: when a particular passage could not be comprehended through a typical understanding of Arabic; when the literal meaning of a verse, according to Muslim scholars, was not intended by God; or when a companion asked for clarification of certain verses. An example includes when the Prophet was asked about the meaning of bushra, glad tidings, in Quranic verses 10 to 63-64, and the Prophet said the verse referred to a good dream that a man sees or which is seen on his behalf. Another example includes the Quranic command pertaining to the time of breaking the fast during the month of Ramadan. For this, the Prophet explained that the white and black thread mentioned in the Quranic verse referred to the early morning light of the horizon contrasting with the darkness of the sky. Tafsir after the passing of Prophet Muhammad. The Muslims living immediately after the death of the Prophet recognized certain companions' skills and capabilities in terms of Quranic knowledge. Before he died, the Prophet proclaimed their superior status concerning the Quran in three ways. First, he used to send them to other cities to teach the Quran and Islam. Secondly, the Prophet would praise certain companions. Thirdly, he would ask certain companions to give fatwas, legal opinions, in his presence. After the death of the Prophet, four distinct schools of Quranic interpretation and recitation, qira'ah, emerged and were identified by the areas in which they became prominent: Makkah, Madinah, Kufa, in the area of present-day Iraq, and Sham, present-day Palestine, Syria and Lebanon. Tafsir after the era of the Tabi'in. By the end of the 2nd century after Hijra, the students of the companions of the Prophet, the Tabi'in, had died. No interpreter of that period had produced works devoted exclusively to Quranic interpretation. It has been claimed that Mujahid wrote a complete tafsir of the Quran. During the latter half of the 2nd century after Hijra, various scholars began compiling works on the Quran according to their specialties and interests. The approaches and methodologies used by grammarians and linguists and by the traditionalists flourished until the end of the 3rd century and the early 4th century after Hijra. Hence, tafsir literature became separated from the main body of hadith literature. Both came to be established as independent sciences. Tafsir emerged as one such specialty. After the separation of tafsir literature from the main body of hadith, each became an independent science with its own literature ad concerns. Hadith literature, for instance, is concerned with transmitted reports on the Prophet's actions and sayings only. Tafsir literature deals with the transmission of reports regarding the Prophet's explanation of the Quran, as well as those of the companions and the tabi'in, together with linguistic, rhetoric, juridical and theological considerations. These reports and considerations were the subject of intense study after the separation between hadith and tafsir had taken place. Tafsir literature was eventually divided into two major types technically known as tafsir bil mazhar and tafsir biri.